There's something that happens to a lot of us as we get older. It's not some sudden crisis, not a big dramatic moment. It's quieter than that. It's this slow, gentle retreat from the world, this gradual narrowing of our lives that we often don't even notice until we really feel its effects. So today, we're going to get into exactly why this happens, look at the hidden mechanics at play inside our own heads, and, most importantly, I'm going to walk you through a clear, step-by-step plan to reclaim a life that feels big, engaged, and just full of energy.
Let's start with the idea that really captures this whole thing. The central, invisible erosion of later life is that your world doesn't usually collapse. It undergoes a series of tiny, self-imposed subtractions that feel like simplifying until you wake up and realize your entire existence has retreated to a 4-block radius and just a handful of predictable habits. Does that sound familiar at all? That urge to simplify, to just cut out the little hustles, that restaurant that's a little too loud, or the errand that's all the way across town, or trying to figure out some new piece of tech. Each one of those decisions makes perfect sense on its own, but over time, they stack up and your world has quietly, almost without you noticing, gotten a whole lot smaller.
If that feeling hits home, the first thing I want you to know is that you are definitely not alone. And this is not some kind of personal failure. It is not a sign of weakness or a lack of character. This whole process is so common, so predictable, that it actually has a name: the invisible retreat. And I want you to think of it like a structural issue. It's a pattern that just sort of emerges from the complex dance between our brains, our changing bodies, and our environments as we age. And understanding that pattern, really seeing its architecture, that is the absolute key to turning it all around.
So to start pushing back against this retreat, we first have to understand why it's even happening. We need a map of the territory, right? What are these invisible currents that are gently pulling us toward a smaller, more predictable life? We're about to map out the terrain of something we can call the comfort trap. It's a place that feels safe, it feels easy, but over time its walls have a way of slowly closing in on us.
Okay, so the core idea here is a psychological principle called environmental docility. Now, I know it sounds a little academic, but the concept is actually really simple. Think about it. As things that were once easy, like say navigating a busy airport or driving at night, get a little bit harder, our brains can start to recalibrate. They begin to see the outside world less as this field of opportunity and more as a source of potential stress. So instead of adapting ourselves to meet the world's challenges, we start shrinking our world to fit what we think we can handle. It's a totally natural reaction, but it's a risky one, because our idea of what we're capable of starts to shrink right along with it.
So this brings us to a huge question. If shrinking our world is so bad for us in the long run, why does it feel so, right in the moment? Why does that decision to stay home, to stick with what's familiar, feel so logical and even comforting? Well, the answer, it turns out, is literally baked into our brain chemistry. Our own biology can sometimes lead us down the wrong path. This whole process is called the habituation spiral. Let me give you an example. You get invited to a party in a neighborhood you don't really know. Your mind instantly starts listing all the potential hassles: the traffic, the parking, the noise, having to make small talk. So you decide not to go. And in that moment, you feel this wave of relief. Well, that feeling, that's your brain rewarding you with a little relief hit of a chemical called dopamine for avoiding stress. It feels like you made the right choice. But that little chemical reward reinforces the act of retreating, and it makes you even more likely to avoid the next challenge. And just like that, the walls of your comfort zone get a little thicker and your world gets a little smaller, one logical feeling decision at a time.
And this retreat also plays out in a huge way in our social lives. As we get older, it's natural to lean on our strong ties, our family, our closest friends, for comfort and support. And that is a wonderful thing. But here's what the research shows us. The real engine for keeping our minds sharp and our worlds large comes from our weak ties. I'm talking about the neighbor you chat with while you get the mail, the barista at your coffee shop, the folks from an old book club. These connections are our main source of new information, fresh perspectives, and unexpected ideas. When our world shrinks, these are the very first relationships to fade away, leaving us in a loving but potentially stagnant echo chamber.
And there are a few other hidden forces at play too. First, there's the sensory bunker. This is what happens when we start consistently avoiding noisy restaurants or crowded museums. Over time, our brain's ability to actually process all that complex stimulation gets weaker from lack of use, which makes those places feel even more overwhelming next time. Then there's incompetence fear, that deep feeling of not wanting to look foolish while learning something new, like a smartphone app. And the great irony is that by refusing to be a beginner, we pretty much guarantee that we stop growing. And finally, there's something called the relational mirror. This one is tough because it's when our loved ones with the absolute best intentions start doing things for us, insisting on handling the online bills or setting up the new TV, which can accidentally send our brains the message that we're not capable anymore.
So that's the map of the shrinking world. And I know, seeing it all laid out like that might feel a little daunting. But the purpose of a map isn't to show you where you're trapped, it's to show you a path out. And the good news is, we have a compass for that journey. We have a clear, actionable protocol for expansion.
Now, this is maybe the most important point, the core philosophy for turning this whole thing around. The way to reverse the retreat is to directly challenge that comfort trap we just talked about. The key principle is this: vitality is a product of controlled friction. Just like a muscle needs resistance to get stronger, or a student has to wrestle with a tough problem to really learn, our minds and our engagement with life need a healthy amount of challenge to stay strong. The goal isn't a life of total ease, it's a life of active, meaningful engagement.
The strategy for this is called the Novelty Re-engagement Protocol, or NRP for short. It's a simple, structured, three-part plan to systematically reintroduce that controlled, healthy friction back into your life. Each part of this protocol is a direct counterattack to the forces we just mapped out, and it's designed to help you start expanding your world again, one small step at a time.
Okay, step 1 is the weekly novelty quota. This is all about intentionally breaking that dopamine-driven habit loop we talked about. The goal is simple. You have to mandate one small, new, non-routine activity every single week. It could be as simple as driving home a different way from the store, listening to a podcast about something you know nothing about, or just trying a new recipe for dinner. The activity itself isn't as important as the signal you're sending to your brain. It's this powerful message that says, hey, I'm still curious, I'm still adaptable, and I'm still open to growth.
Second is the social week tie rule. This is designed to deliberately rebuild those vital, casual connections that are so often the first casualty of the invisible retreat. It means making a conscious, planned effort to engage with people outside of your immediate circle. You could commit to chatting with a neighbor for 5 minutes while you're outside, or calling an old colleague just to see how they're doing, or even going to a free talk at the local library. It's all about deliberately restarting that flow of life that brings new energy, new stories, and new ideas into your world.
And the third step is the friction audit. This is where you get to become a detective of your own habits and excuses. Think about an activity you used to genuinely love, but you just don't do anymore. Maybe it's going to the movies, or visiting a museum, or walking in a particular park. Ask yourself honestly, why did I really stop? Was it the hassle of finding parking? Was it a confusing online ticketing system? The friction audit is all about identifying those tiny little barriers, those micro-frictions, and then finding a strategic solution instead of just letting them trigger a full-on retreat.
Okay, a protocol is great in theory, but it's pretty useless without action. So let's get really specific. What can you do this week to actually put this into practice? What are the very first steps you can take to consciously become the architect of your own expansion instead of just a passive observer of your world's retreat?
Here are 4 concrete, totally achievable actions you can take this week. I want you to think of them not as chores, but as little experiments in expansion. They're designed to be small wins that build momentum and begin that process of retraining your brain for engagement and curiosity.
Let's break them down. First, the audit. Pick one thing you've simplified out of your life and figure out the specific friction point that made you stop. Second, the commute. Once this week, just go to a neighborhood you haven't visited in a while. Don't go to run an errand, the only goal is sensory input. Notice the buildings, the sounds, the smells. You're just gathering new data for your brain. Third, converse. Set a tiny goal of one brief, pleasant conversation with a weak tie. A cashier, a librarian, just exercise that social muscle. And finally, adapt. Pick one piece of tech that could make your life easier. A ride-sharing app, a grocery delivery service, and commit just 20 focused minutes to learning the basics. This sends a huge signal of competence to your brain.
You know, when you start making these small shifts, something really powerful begins to happen. It's not just your schedule that changes, your whole relationship with the world starts to shift. You move from this defensive posture of managing decline to an open, curious stance of active engagement. You start to embody a new identity, the sage adventurer.
And this all comes down to a fundamental change in mindset, which is captured perfectly in this idea. Curiosity is your best defense against aging. Friction is the fuel of vitality. This reframes everything, doesn't it? A challenge is no longer a threat to be avoided, it's the essential ingredient for a vibrant life. Curiosity becomes your compass. Curiosity is the desire to seek out the new. Friction is the act of engaging with it. You need both. Together, they are the engine of a vital life. Ultimately, this whole protocol presents a choice between two paths, two different stories for your life. You can choose the sensory bunker, a life of retreat and safety,
where you're a passive recipient of a world that inevitably just gets smaller over time. Or you can choose to be the sage adventurer, the active, sovereign operator of a life defined by curiosity and growth, a life that, remarkably, can keep getting bigger. The crucial point here is that your later years do not have to be a story of subtraction and retreat. By consciously choosing to embrace controlled friction and by nurturing your own natural curiosity, they can be defined by the very opposite, by cognitive sharpness, by deep social richness, and by the profound joy of living in a world that never, ever stops expanding.
So I want to end with a direct invitation. Take a moment right now and make a commitment to yourself. Think about your own life. What is one activity, just one, that you've simplified away? It doesn't have to be big. Maybe it's just walking to a different coffee shop or calling an old friend. What is one small way you can bring it back into your life this week? That single conscious step is the beginning of redrawing the map of your world.